All right, good morning, and thank you for coming here. This is an opportunity for us to share in some information that will really improve patient outcomes when done exactly as Dr. Morgan said, when done correctly. So thank you for coming, and I also want to thank our faculty. They kind of found out more at the last minute, so the ones that are here really scrambled to be here, so I appreciate you guys and all the work you do. And also we need to thank the Student Affairs Office, so Dean Johnson and his team, and students who really found out about this technology and this approach and really pushed for it to go into Parker Fit and so forth, and you'll be meeting that group in a little bit as well, but two of them are my co-presenters today, Bo and Larissa. Bo's Try 9 and Larissa's Try 6. And then, of course, Dr. Morgan and Dr. Michela for their vision with this material as well. So, as we start here, I just want to point you to the slide that's on the screen. And as we look at the title, there's something in there where it says, your patient's functional fingerprint. And that's exactly how I talk to patients about this material. So certainly there's ways that people move that are consistent among populations. So if I had a small item and I just dropped it on the floor here and then I asked 20 people to form a line over here and one by one show me how you would pick it up. If they weren't embarrassed in front of everyone to do it and they just did it naturally, we'd see that there were some pretty consistent movement patterns among them just because they're people. But aside from those consistencies, there's also inconsistencies, and there's little intrinsic movement patterns that are unique to each individual. And it's actually looking at these things and identifying these that enables us to do more of a patient-centered application, because in the United States, patients have become diagnoses. So if you ever met anyone who is, they identify themselves, they've been diagnosed with depression and they just assume, they're depression, or they're an overeater, or they assume they have arthritis, and that's who they are, and they limit their behavior. So we psychologically adapt to the labels we give each other, which causes a challenge in healthcare, because people psychologically then adapt to what they think they're capable of recovering from and what they're capable of doing in life. And it's actually knowing the individual characteristics of each and every patient and applying your treatment to them specifically that will enable you to achieve great things with this patient. Because ultimately, whatever box you put yourself in as a chiropractor, chiropractors are famous for this. So I'm a bone doctor, I'm a joint doctor, I'm a nerve doctor, I'm a brain doctor. We constantly label ourselves, and then we all want to spend a lot of time debating which one of these labels is the best label. Bottom line is, it doesn't matter which box you put yourself in or what you call yourself. At the end of the day, if you're not a human potential doctor who's helping people achieve what their purpose is in life, you're really not making the difference that you could be making. And that's what this material is all about. So I'm going to begin by just talking a little bit about the why, and this will only take about 20 minutes or so, and then some people will come up here and show you how some of the technology works. But some of the why behind why would you do this with patients is, the first fact is, we were built for movement. We're not built to do what you're doing right now. We're built more for what I'm doing and more. So our health regulates a lot of what goes on in the body based on information it gets from movement. So if you think about the way our bodies run, let me just throw a few examples out here. So balance control, coordination, joint viscosity maintenance, muscle hypertrophy, circulatory system, brain function. A lot of that comes from information that is fed to the system through movement. So movement is inherent to our health. So with that fact, then we have to look at, well, how have we been assessing people? If the history of patient assessment has been passive, where we're looking at someone who's not in motion. They're either standing against a wall, they're either sitting down, they're either laying on a table, and we're doing things upon the patient or to the patient. So palpation, orthopedic tests, things like that are all mostly a passive application. So we're trying to get in there. Apply passive means to get information that we think is really valuable to then help a person. Now, I'm not putting any of that down. Certainly that stuff does help us and without a doubt move in the right direction with patients, but it doesn't get us the information that's necessary for the fact that we are beings built for movement, and that's what we should be doing with the majority of our time. So if there's a disconnect between us being beings of movement and the way we assess people, the next thing I'd like you to understand is how people move is really a reflection of how they live their lives. So we understand the body to be a self-healing entity. It regulates, it recovers, it does that naturally. We don't do much for it. So you're all saying, "Ooh, I wish I had that on my lap," aren't you? So, okay. So we're going to need much longer than 1 hour here today. Okay. So how we live we often look at this and say, well, the body does these things, and it really does, the body does put up with a lot of the abuse we throw its way. So with the deficiencies in the way we eat, the way we manage stress, some of the baggage we carry from relationships, the lack of sleep we get, the lack of exercise, all those things are insults to the body. And, we kind of count on the body to recover from that. But the reality is that we mistake the body's ability to self-regulate as forgiveness for what we do to it. And eventually it catches up. And that's true in the musculoskeletal health world. So as you look at it, most people are in front of a doctor of any type for a musculoskeletal reason, not because of one single high magnitude impact. It's the little things that have happened through the years that have now put this person in a position where they need help. I have a quote that I like to read. So whenever I do beginner introductory information about movement assessment or motion assessment, I love to read this quote. This is from Kelly Starrett, and it's out of a book called The Supple Leopard. And in there he says, "Our bodies are set up to go through millions of movement cycles. So every time you squat, bend over, or walk in a compromised position, you're burning through those cycles at an accelerated rate. So think of turning on and off the lights of your house. That light switch is set up for tens of thousands of cycles, seriously, millions. So by the time you've worn a hole in your kneecap, herniated your disc, or torn your labrum, chances are you've expended millions of cycles." And what he's talking about there is the bad relationship our culture has with pain. As you can see on the slide, he and others are concerned with pain and how it guides people to help. So in our culture, pain is really now become a condition. Okay? There's diagnostic codes for it. There's diagnostic codes for neck pain. There's diagnostic codes for back pain, and headaches and shoulder pain and so on and so on. And if you turn on the TV, it certainly doesn't take long to see a commercial where they're saying, "Hey, take 2 of these little pills and your back pain will be gone." Or you can find an ex-athlete who says, "Put this on your low back and your back pain's gone." And really what they're saying is your problem is the pain. The reality of that is pain isn't the problem. Pain is the indicator. It's the light that tells you something's wrong with the system. And certainly we can have discussions about symptoms that are really valuable in a history. We can use that information to kind of think about some of the things that might be going on, but we certainly never transcend that conversation of a history to communicate that pain is the problem. And this is such a big problem because there are patients who go to a doctor and they literally say, "Yep, I agree with you, you have back pain, or you have headaches, or you have shoulder pain." And all that doctor did at that point is really all they did is prove they're not very valuable to the modern healthcare system, in my opinion. A little bit harsh, but that's true. They're really, if they're saying, if a patient writes on a paper, "Hey, I have back pain," and they get diagnosed with back pain, there's not much that's going to happen after that. There really isn't. That patient will never really reach their potential. That patient needs to be in front of a doctor who understands that symptoms are a sign that something's wrong, and then it's the doctor's job to figure out what's wrong. So society doesn't come pre-programmed with that thought. And here's why. In what we know, mainstream healthcare that's very apparent is if you go get injured, you're going to have pain. Okay, that's not hard to put together. And then if you have pain, you're going to have dysfunction. So think of someone who gets tackled on the football field and they have a knee injury, so they're in pain. Well, now they might get some hip problems and so forth because of that and so forth. So that's really a well understood linkage or pathway. Another one that's well understood is you can get pain. You can wake up with it. You could grind your teeth at night and now have a headache. Well, if that headache continues for most of the day, you might get some compensatory dysfunction with it, and eventually you could become injured with that. So that pathway is really well understood. So 1 and 2 are well understood. What's not well understood is the third one. And the third one is, this is interesting, because it's the third one that's affecting the majority of lives in the United States. Forget that. Majority of lives in the world. So in the fact that you have dysfunction in your body, and you don't know it because there is no pain. So movement patterns are suboptimal. Injury shows up, and then there's pain. So have you ever heard of anybody who has just bent over to pick up something small from the ground? Back in the day before we had phones and all that, we actually had these things called newspapers that were delivered to the house, and you had to pay someone to do that. But a big thing was there were a lot of back injuries from picking up your newspaper. Okay, so have you ever met anyone who had an injury because they took groceries out of their car, or carried a vacuum cleaner up the stairs, or went to move furniture, and before they could even overexert themselves, braced themselves, and it's like, oh wow, that just hurt right away, and the furniture didn't move, and they never even got a chance to really get into it and move it. It just happened. It's because of that third situation right there. So when there's pain and injury, you can take every diagnosis known to humankind in the world, and they get categorized in one of these 4 causes. There's nothing beyond these 4 causes. Someone can have pathology and have pain and injury. Certainly you can have a disease process that causes that. There could be a catastrophe. Something bad has happened to you. So you've been hit by a car, you fell down the steps, whatever it is, you tackled on the football field, and now you have pain and injury. So those make sense. You could overexert yourself. So if we all leave here right now, we go out in the parking lot, and you all stand around me while I try to lift someone's car, one of 3 things is going to happen. The car will move, I will brake, or I will give up. So chances are it's going to be the last 2 that are more likely, right? So I could overexert myself and have those. But it's the last one is what I'm talking about, breakdown. Someone picked up their newspaper. Someone picked up a vacuum cleaner. Someone had problems carrying their groceries, lifting their child, and now they say they have pain. Well, hopefully, if you're in this institution to become a chiropractor, you understand one thing, that the body was probably built to be more resilient than to become injured while you pick up a newspaper. So we were built for success. We were built to be successful not only in our lives, but with our health. And the quest to find out what goes wrong is really to find out, well, why do people become unsuccessful in that quest of life? Why are they unsuccessful with their health? That's the breakdown category. So the vast majority of musculoskeletal conditions that plague the financial aspects of the world are not because of pathology, catastrophe, or overexertion. They're because of breakdown and degenerative changes that have now caused long-term disability. And when you look at the years lived with disability in the world, forget about the United States for a second. Everyone always beats up the United States. But let's look at the world. It's the leading cause of money spent. So there's more money spent in all years lived with a musculoskeletal disability than any other healthcare challenge worldwide. So there is a tremendous, tremendous need right there. So with all that said, if people were built to move, and we need to assess them for movement, if movement is a reflection of how you live your life, if there is this ability to break down over time and then have a major issue, then this is the message I give patients. Well, how you feel is a direct result of how you function. If you were to all walk out of here now, get in your cars, turn on your car, and you see this on your dashboard, you look at it, and then you drive away, and you drive for 100 miles. You probably notice that your engine shuts off. Your car starts to coast a little bit, and you come to a stop, hopefully on the side of the road. Okay? Well, when that happens, you can give me a call. I have a little canister in my garage. It's a gallon canister, and I'll fill it up with fuel, gas, and I'll bring it to you. I'll empty it into your gas tank, and then you can turn your ignition. So at that point, your car's likely to start. Okay, you with me so far? That's not a big scenario, right? I got it. Okay. So how many of you think that by me doing that for you, I solved your problem? Let me see. Raise your hands if I solved your problem. Absolutely nobody? Okay. All right. How many think I didn't solve your problem and you got to take some responsibility from that point forward? Okay. Not bad. How many of you, no matter what I say, you're just not going to raise your hand today? You refuse to raise your hand. Anyone besides Dr. Arredondo? No one? Anyone in an alien tractor beam and you're under control of... Nope. Okay. So 0% of us think that it didn't solve the problem. 25% of us think that there's additional action, and the remaining percentage are paralyzed. So as we look at that, your patient's health is the same as this meter right here. When they have an issue, their tank's empty. They're coming to you for help. You do your assessment, you render care, they feel better, they go back to life. All you did was put a gallon of gas in their tank. That's the only thing you did. They have 1 gallon, and they're going to run out again, whether it be in a few days, some weeks, some months. The tank's going to be empty again. So the question then is, how do we fill a patient's tank? How do we get some longevity out of it? How is there a functional longevity that leads to interdependence on that patient, and now they can experience the things that are important in life? The difference is in the information you start to gather from your history that then leads to motion assessments. So a history is a series of questions you ask a patient based on the reason they're there. So, things like, well, when did it start? What does it feel like? What makes it worse? What makes it better? What's it like at night? What's it like in the morning? So forth. All these things are really good questions because they start to give us information so we can start to think, well, okay, they're here because they overexerted themselves. They're here because they had a catastrophe. This happened to them. They're here because they may have a disease process going on. So it starts our thinking pattern where we can put this in one of the 4 categories. You with me? So with that, the best questions you can ask a patient, in my opinion, when you're doing a history are, well, how has this affected the quality of your life? What does this keep you from doing that you really want to do? And my favorite, if you and I are successful with care, how's your life going to change? With those questions, you're going to start to get back the stuff that's important to them, and now you can devise a plan that's going to fill their tank. So getting them to the point where they can live up to their purpose and their potential is actually what fills the tank. So prior to these little dysfunctions we have dysfunctions in basic movement patterns. So if you look at someone's ability to squat and lower themselves down to the ground, that's fairly consistent with what you need to do to get out of a car, to get up from a chair after watching TV, to walk up the stairs, to step over your dog when you're trying to get to the refrigerator. All those things, all those movements have recruitment patterns and sequencing that are consistent with a fundamental pattern that we can now assess. So it's actually possible to determine these little movement inadequacies prior to them becoming full-blown out dysfunctions, which are prior to all the microtraumatic wear and tear that occurs over time, which is then prior to them getting an injury in a condition and then having pain in their mind, which tells them, oh, I got a condition because I have pain. Okay? So we can catch it early. And that's the true value of what we can do here. Okay? So with those fundamental thoughts of why we should be doing this with patients, if you believe in the why there, So let's take a look at actual basics and application. And this will just take five minutes or so. This work gives you the ability to help people who are symptomatic and who are asymptomatic. Okay? Because the goals are slightly different and the assessments can be modified. So if someone comes in and they're like, oh, doc, I have back pain, and they're walking like this, well, we at least want to return them back to full activity of their daily life. But based on the questions I gave you, for patients, did we uncover anything above their ability to sit in a car, sit at work, do whatever they do for, at home, washing dishes, walking their dog, etc.? What is that they really want to live up to? That's what you uncover in the asymptomatic area, and now you have a whole new approach to help someone achieve something that they never did before. That's the true value of what you have to work with. It actually broadens the scope of people who will respond to care. So some concepts, some real easy things here. So assessment of motion begins with a complex maneuver. And there's plenty of examples out there. So the squat is the most common one, because I think it's probably one of the easiest to assess and look at. So you have a complex motion. And years ago, we're talking 15 plus years, when we started really doing this stuff, we used to actually diagnose off this motion. So we'd see someone who would lower down into a squat, and we'd see their heels come up off the ground like that. Well, as soon as their heels came up, we said, oh, you have tight gastrocs. Okay, and then we'd write that down. So we got to loosen your gastrocs. As they'd go into the squat, we'd see a knee drift medially, and we'd say, oh, your abductors of your hip are overreactive compared to the stabilization of the adductors. So we need to do this and we need to do that. So that's how this stuff kind of started. And it was a little bit more difficult. But what we found is a lot of our assumptions diagnostically off those motions just weren't true. They weren't very true. So when it came time to treatment, it's like, oh, well, that abductor group is not restricted. So then why did their knee move medially? So right now, if you're learning this for the first time, you're at the best time in ever, because it's easier than ever. And what you're really looking for is a complex motion good or is it bad? That's really all you're doing. So you could say it's functional or dysfunctional, however you want to label it. But complex motion doesn't happen without a brain-body connection that's appropriate. And that's motor coordination. So motor coordination has to work for a body to express a complex maneuver like that. The foundation to motor coordination is joint function and tissue function. So you have to have those things properly. So let me just lay it out differently here. If you have your complex motion up top, that's your squat, and they fail it, you then have to look at the regions that were related to the squat. Well, the regions are the hips, they have to flex, the knees have to flex, and there has to be mobility in the ankles. So you'd be breaking out those regions and looking at those. And you'd be looking at them for joint function, tissue function, and so forth. So what I'm trying to tell you is joint function and tissue function are the foundation before stability and motor control can ever be determined as a problem. Okay? If you have a joint that's locked up and not working properly, you certainly aren't going to have proper motor control. Think of it this way. Have you ever helped someone try and ride a bike? So a very frustrating experience for everyone involved. Okay, my daughters didn't speak to me for like 4.5 years after I tried to teach them to ride a bike, right? So it's a challenge. But think of it, so someone gets on the bike and they try to ride it and they fall over. Okay, so they couldn't get the coordination of the pedals, they couldn't get the coordination of the handles, they were leaning to one side, they didn't know how to counterbalance, the whole thing was a disaster. So if you take that person off the bike and you adjust them and you put them back on the bike to ride it, what do you think's going to happen? The exact same thing. Yeah, they're going to fall again. And they're going to be wobbly and all that type of stuff, because it's probably not a joint problem. It's a brain-body connection issue. So what do? We educate the body to self-learn. So we put training wheels on, and then the bike kind of bounces from side to side, and the person on the bike is kind of getting the feel of when it goes too far. And then we take the training wheels off, and we hold on to the seat, and we run next to it. And then we let them go for like 3 feet increments, and then catch them again. And then we let them go 1 block, and then they crash into the bushes at the end, right? And then, but as all this stuff starts to sink in, the body self-learns and becomes educated in the process of riding a bike. That's how you restore motor control. So one of the challenges in chiropractic is you see chiropractors adjusting patients who have a motor control deficiency and not a joint deficiency. And there's some challenges in outcome at that point. Joint, very important, before motor control. Okay? So that's what that is really trying to communicate to you. If you're going to do this kind of thing, then there's just 4 easy steps that apply to everything. And if you just think yourself through these 4 steps, you'll usually come up with the right answer. So you begin by looking at someone's complex movement. When that's dysfunctional, you then test the regions. The patient uses active motor control of a region, and if that fails, if that's dysfunctional, you apply passive mobility to the region. So you move it for them. So passive mobility at that point becomes a line in the sand. If you have active dysfunction, you apply passive mobility. If that passive mobility gives a good range and quality of mobility there, it's functional. You're dealing with motor coordination issue or an instability. If it's dysfunctional, you can't move it, they can't move it, you can't move it. It's time for them to get adjusted, and it's time to release some soft tissue. Those are the basics. Very, very simple. So if you remember this slide with passive mobility, this will not only help you in functional assessments, it's also going to help you determine areas that need adjustments versus areas that need soft tissue release versus areas that need therapeutic exercise. Very simple, easy step. All right, so I'm going to wrap it up here and let you guys look at some of this get done. Here's something that's radically different. When a patient comes in and they can sit, stand, or walk reasonably well, so someone who comes in and says, oh, I'm like this, and they can't get down the hallway is not ready for this at this point. I'll give you an example. But you begin with looking at the person as a human being. This is cool because this is what's lost in healthcare, isn't it? People are treated just like their symptom. Oh, you have back pain, so it's your back. Okay? So can you have back pain because your back is messed up subsequent to what's going on with your ankles? How many people think that's true? Raise your hand. How many people think that's not true? How many people still refuse to raise your hand after all this time? Just nothing I can do. Okay, just 1. All right, we're 2. Okay, so this helps us to start to look at the patient as a human being again. So the thing is, your patient isn't back pain. They're a human being that has back pain. And there's a lot of layers on top of that. There's emotional layers that are with it. There's relationship layers that are with it. And there's self-worth layers that are with it. So all that is there. But looking at them at a global level, we start to see them as a human being once again. When they fail on a global level, when it's dysfunctional, you look at regions. You break out the regions that are related to what they can't do. When the regions fail, you go down to the joint and the tissue level. So you start at the big and you end at the small. Helps you organize your exam. What's really cool is the way you care for them. All you do is reverse this. Okay? I remember talking to some chiropractors 15 plus years ago about squat mobility, and one of them said, well, if they can't squat, they just need to do more squats, is what they said. And so if you know anything about this material at all, if you've ever read a book about it or you're concerned about it and you just know this much about it, that is the worst answer you can possibly give. That is the worst answer. It's not that they need to retrain squats. It's that something's broken and it needs to be fixed. So at the segmental level, it needs to be fixed. At the tissue level, it needs to be fixed. At the regional level, it needs to be fixed. And then the global level will express itself. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay. that is the easiest format I could give this to you. So let me tell you about a patient. So how does this work? I always use this patient as an example when I'm talking, an introductory on this material. This is a patient I'll never forget. She was really cool. She was a 15-year-old girl who played soccer. And she came into the office because her right knee was twice the size of her left knee, and she was on crutches, and she had knee pain. So what happened was, she was sitting on a fence, a split rail fence. You know what that is? 2 posts here and like 2 sideways ones. They're about 3.5 feet, 4 feet off the ground, I'd say. She's sitting on this fence, and in the process of getting down from the fence, she just kind of hops off like that. And as soon as she landed, she had instantaneous pain in her right knee, and she crumbled to the ground and fell. And she couldn't walk after that. So she had this immediate onset of right knee pain because she jumped off of a 3.5-foot fence. Okay? So she came in. When I looked at her, I saw her knee was huge, so let's go to imaging. That was basically the exam on the first day. So I'm not going to torture her with an orthopedic test on that right knee because she was in so much pain. So I knew something wasn't right. So we did imaging, got the results back. She tore her meniscus. Okay? So does that make sense why the knee's swollen and she's in pain? Yeah, makes sense. So what do? Help her recover from the meniscus, right? So any other questions on your mind there? Anyone have a question about this at all? What about the question, does this even make sense? Okay, so do you believe that the body was built to be resilient against the ability to just hop off a 3.5-foot fence? So why would someone hop off a 3.5-foot fence, hit the ground with their foot, and all of a sudden tear their meniscus? That completely doesn't make any sense. And any doctor should see that at that point. We should realize that. So step 1 was helping her recover where she could walk. Okay, where she could stand. And then I was able to sit down with her and say, here's what's going on. You had knee pain because you tore your meniscus, just like I told you. But here's why that happened in you. And I was able to actually sequence out the things in her body that were failing that allowed her to be susceptible to what happened. And when I met her for the first time, on the first day, I asked her those 3 questions. I said, so how's this been affecting the quality of your life? If we're successful, how's your life going to change? What's important to you? What do you want to do? And her answers were all soccer related. She had a very big plan for her soccer future. And her whole thing was about soccer and this. And she said, I need to get back to the team. I need to play again and all those types of things. Well, her injury level didn't require surgery, and her recovery prognosis was fairly good, and her age was low enough where she probably could recover and play soccer again. But what's likely to happen? It's just going to get all torn up again. Okay? So I was able to point out the things that happened in her body that caused it to happen and work with those so we can get her back to a full return to soccer. Not only that, look at the things she wanted to improve in soccer performance-wise and help her with those things. And that's what filled her tank. And she returned to the team. She played soccer well into college, and she's out and married now. So that's how long ago this patient was. But that's why it's such a great story, because without this information, I would have been another doctor who said, you have a meniscus tear. Let's get it healed. Let's get it resilient to flexion. Let's get it stabilized in flexion and extension. Let's get you standing, walking, running. You're cleared. And that's the tragedy of what's going on. The other reason I like to use soccer is, do you know that soccer injuries among young females is escalating at an alarming rate? Okay? So real interesting. And so there's debates about this. There's actually discussions about this. And you know what science sometimes blames for this? Think about anatomy for a second. What's different, female versus male, pelvis-wise? Someone said it. Sorry, Q angle. Q angle. So they have different Q angles, right? And they're blaming the Q angle. So they were born to not play soccer is what that explanation is. Okay, does that make sense to anybody in the room? especially females who like soccer, okay, right? So it's the doctors at this level that are going to help the people at that level achieve what they want out of life. Now, and just to end here, and then we're going to bring some people up and show you some things. I don't want you to think this is all athletic. So a common thing is, okay, yeah, but I don't want to care for athletes. This has nothing to do with athletic care. It has to do with human beings. So that's why I love the Nike quote the best: if you have a body, you are an athlete. And that is very, very true. So we all move in the same means. It's just that athletes do it at higher levels. So this applies to, as Dr. Morgan said, I think it was him or someone, that senior citizens. So you're going to have a senior citizen, someone who's 68 years old, you're going to have them squat down to the floor, do a deep squat or do a narrow squat or anything like that? Probably not. So is that population at a huge risk for falling? Yes. So how do you modify this? It's based on your expertise. So instead of having someone do a narrow base squat where they lower themselves down, or even an overhead squat for someone who's more athletic, you put a chair there, you have them sit in the chair, and you run the squat analysis off them getting up from the chair. Okay? It can be done with everything. So anybody who's a human being has the issues we're talking about. So you can't just reserve it for a specific population. What it requires is that you need a little more education to learn how to apply it to someone who is 75 and has already fallen once and has a previously fractured hip. Okay? There's tremendous value there. Okay? So these are some underlying fundamentals, and these are some concepts and so forth with the care. So what do you think, just on how many people are behind what I just said? Anybody? Do you believe in anything I just said about human potential and so forth? Okay, so you're kind of with me? So if you raised your hand, it's kind of a sucker moment. I hate to do this to you. But if you buy into this message at all, you accept responsibility, and you can't go back to the way it was. You just can't do it. Buying into the message means that you're going to be a student for the rest of your life. You're going to be a self-learner. You're going to realize that we know things that are different about movement today, and every year it gets more and more and more. So how I look at people move today is very different than how I did it 15 years ago, for sure. But with that, if you accept that responsibility, if that is you, if you got that little fire in your belly, what I can tell you is those people make the best doctors. The ones that change every single year because they can't stand how bad they were the year before. That's what makes the best doctor, right there. And then if you're actually treating people like individuals, looking for that things that separates them, and then you're willing to pounce on it and use it to get that person to live up their potential, that's the best doctor who's going to make the biggest difference in the patients, who will then go out there and live up to their potential and experience their life. So that's what this is all about. So thank you for coming in. Thank you for listening to this. And as you take it to heart, I'd like to bring up a group of students who are going to go ahead and show you a little bit more about how you can use this now to capture it. So the advantage here is we can now capture movement. We can use it to educate patients. You can use it to document start care. You can use it to document progress. And you can use it to document discharge from care where they're going back to their life in a full fashion. So thank you very much, and I'd like to bring up Bo, Larissa, and the team. All right.
Thank you, Dr. Bodner. We really appreciate that message. Now we're going to kind of demo and kind of show what we can do with all the information Dr. Bodner has given us. And let's thank Dr. Morgan again for getting this for 2 years for all of us. That's $1,400 a year without equipment, guys. Thank you, Doc. We needed that. Now, we're going to go through a couple different ranges of motion. We know this is a great marketing tool. You can look up and see it's a great marketing tool. Everyone can see that this will bring patients in. Now, if you do this with a patient or a future patient, and they come in and you don't use it on them or don't know how to use it, what do you think that patient thinks? They don't know what you're doing, that you don't know what you're doing. So what we're going to do is just demo a little bit of how you can use it. So first, we're going to have Larissa real quick explain some ranges of motion.
So the first thing we want to do is have our patient stand in front of the camera directly. We don't want them tilted a certain way. You can see the bottom, the green circle will show us if they are if they are positioned incorrectly. So we can kind of use that as a guideline to where to put our patient. So Kyle, what we're going to do here is we're going to look at cervical lateral flexion to the left. So here in a moment, when Grant gives you the clear, all we're going to do is have you take your left ear to your left shoulder. But I want to make sure that the patient is aware that I don't want him to move his shoulders around or any of his lower body. So we're just looking at a certain area of his neck. So Grant is going to calibrate the machine. And then Kyle, as you move, if you feel any pain, I just want you to let us know that there's pain. You'll stop there and then keep going through that range of motion as you can.
Awesome. So what this now shows us is we can actually change what level of pain is by asking the patient. We have different options as well with stiffness, popping, different things. And if you look at the note as Grant changes it, it'll actually move in the note that's going to go into a SOAP note, which I believe they're trying to transition into EHR so we can actually use this for functional assessment and get this data. But you can actually change whatever they're doing. Now look in the top left, you have pre-treatment. This shows pre-treatment. So we can take where the pain level is through the range of motion, how much their end range of motion is, and then after treating them, we do it again. And you can show like, hey, you were only able to go 12 degrees before it hurt. Now you can go 17 degrees. You may still feel that pain, but you just gained range of motion before it caught you. So that's a huge benefit to using this range of motion feature. Let's go ahead and we're going to move on to a 3D posture now. And with the 3D posture, the cool thing here is most posture screens, I think we have the iPads too, most of those are 2D. Now if you think about 2D, that's not all the planes. We have 3 planes of motion. Now we add 3D and get that transverse plane. So if we can actually see if there's a shoulder forward, something's back, and this is also going to be more of that functional assessment that Dr. Bodner was talking about. We're not going to do just one picture. You're going to take multiple pictures. Then you're going to watch sway of joints. You're going to watch how everything is moving through time.
All right, so for posture, this is super sweet because all we have to do is tell the patient to stand in front of the camera and act natural. We can even keep a conversation going with him because we find that a lot of times when we are dealing with posture scans, I'll tell the patient, okay, we're going to look at your posture, and then immediately as a patient who doesn't know what you're about to do, they're immediately going to straighten up. So we want to look at a natural standing way that he is. So I will stand behind Kyle, and I'll just say, okay, we're going to hang out here and take a deep breath in, let it out, and Grant will grab a couple capture photos.
So cool thing here, Grant's going to pull us up the data right now. Did you notice that Larissa was able to stand behind the patient? That's another thing you don't get with a lot of the technologies. Anytime that you have a patient standing here and you try to do a screening with them, if you come on camera, it's going to flip around. This allows you to be behind the patient, stabilize them. I know Dr. Morgan mentioned working with like geriatrics, nursing homes, different things like that. You worry about them falling with balance assessments. That allows you to stand right here and take all this data without having to worry about your patient going down. Now we look at the actual screen. So we have an overhead view. That's going to show you how all the joints stack up. And if you look at the bottom here, there's a big list of stuff. Go ahead and roll through that, Grant. That shows you all the data it's taking. I mean, I don't know if you can read it from there, but it goes into deep detail about shoulder positioning, bilaterales. You can look at how things are moving. And then if you go on the far left, you're looking at asymmetries. So we're looking at if one shoulder's higher than the other, everywhere it's moving. And then, of course, you have your side view. Now, how can we get a side view if we just look straight ahead? It's 3D. That's the point of this. That's why we're not doing the 2D. We want to use the advancements in technology that we have. So this is pretty much what you can do really quickly. You saw how fast that posture screen was. So you want to go on to the next one? All right, so next we're going to do functional. Now with a functional exam, we're just going to show a squat. Like Dr. Bodner said, it's pretty easy to do. We're going to show Kyle going through a range of motion. While he does this, I believe we're stepping on camera. While he does this, we're going to have, I want you guys to watch the overhead on the far right of the screen. And on the left, it's going to show the bilaterales. Go ahead. So you could see as Kyle was going through these ranges of motion, Grant's going to pull it up for us real quick. So as Kyle goes through this, we have the overhead view. It's tracking all his joints. It's tracking as he goes through. We're getting rotation. You can see how he rotates on the top there. It shows where his hips, his shoulders, and his knees move, all separately. Now we have all of this data. We're also, if you look at, there's little black boxes, you may not be able to see them from here, but those are actually degrees, and that's degrees of joints. So if I take Kyle into a bottom of a squat, I can look at this hip is closed down to 36 and this one's at 48. That's something we need to look at, especially with an athlete that's lifting. If you have an asymmetry that bad through your hips as you're squatting, you're going to get dysfunction, you're going to get tissue breakdown. All right, so let's go. Now we're going to move to balance. Balance is pretty cool. This is the one that we were kind of talking about. You can assess the geriatrics, assess everybody, but this is huge for athletes too. Most sports, when you're playing sports, you're doing it one-legged. No one's really ever on 2 feet as they're playing a sport. You're always moving. You're always on 1 foot. Now we can assess your balance, and we can track where you are. Let's take them through it. Can you explain it?
So for this one, you guys can see the little boxes at the bottom. We have a few options. So we can, if Grant were to click through these, we can look at left foot down, right foot down, and then both feet down. And then we can also click eyes open or eyes closed. So this allows us to either look at a motor, vestibular, or taking out vision. So we can look at all 3 pathways and kind of see what's going on with them here. In this case, we're going to do eyes open, and we're going to do left foot down. So as Bo mentioned earlier, if we are dealing with the geriatric population, I can stand behind them no matter what just to make them feel safe. We notice that balance will be a little more off if they feel as if they're going to fall. So we always want to stand here just to ensure them that they are safe and they won't be falling over. So Kyle, what we're going to do here is going to count you down, and you're just going to take your right leg and put it in the air. And then I want you to try and stabilize yourself. If you need to put your foot down at any time, you can do so. Just go ahead and bring it back up and try to keep yourself stable.
So as this goes on, I want you guys to watch how it tracks. It's going to track him. Kyle's going to move around a lot. He's going to show how the data is going to follow him. If you look, it's going to have big jumps because no one moves this much normally. But look at the overhead tracking. You see that green dot, that green line? What that does is it puts a dot right in the center of his head, and as he shifts, I've seen people just doing assessments in the clinic, just the 2 feet down, you can see them shift, and it follows them shifting. And these are, I'm exaggerating this motion, but it shows these little shifts. Now, we can go into neurology and go into corrections with that. We do more vestibular system with eyes closed, and that's how you can kind of assess different types of patients. You get your patients that you want to assess vestibular, stability, all different types, and you can use this to do it in 20 seconds very quickly. Now, we do recommend doing a left and a right foot and then a 2 feet as well, but always be, like Larissa said, always make sure the patients don't go down.
Another great way to utilize this tool is to screen football teams. So we can take an entire football team, take them through a baseline concussion test, and then you are the person who has that baseline data that if or when they do get injured, their parents are immediately going to come to you. So you can take baseline data and have that and store it for later, as well as use it for general hip stabilities. We can do different ranges to see how their stability is in their glutes, as well as putting them into different vestibular canals. So we've actually done testing to where we will work with people's neurology and then simply retest them in a certain canal that wasn't working so hot, and then we can see if we've made a difference.
So these are basically all the systems. Now, the last thing that this has, it actually has a full functional movement exam on here. If you think about a functional movement exam, usually it's going to take you about 15, 20 minutes. You're going to have just kind of be grading by eye. You're going to score it from 0 to 3 possibly, whatever one you want to look at. This is going to take all that away. What this is going to do, it's going to take you into functional movements, ranges of motion. Then you're going to do balance as well, and it's going to put all that data together and give you a score. When you have that score, that's what you want to improve on. Now, this functional assessment only takes 5 minutes, and you're recording all the data through that. You're tracking all the joints and ranges of motion, sways, everything through that. And while you're doing it by hand and manually, you're not. You're going to try to write down as much as you can, but you're not getting this much data. So this allows you to do it faster. You get more data from it. And if multiple doctors that all say practice a certain style of screening all go up there to screen, they're all going to grade differently. What's not going to happen with this is not going to grade differently because you're going to have more objective data compared to subjective. And that's basically all that we have for this. We're not going to go through a full CAMS. We don't want to take the 5 minutes to go through that, but I believe we're going to do a Q&A with Dr. Bodner up here. Maybe? Doc? Yep. So that's everything here. Give a big hand.
Okay. Do we have a way to record? Okay. All right.
Does anybody have any questions about what Dr. Bodner was speaking about, what we spoke about, anything like that?
Yep.
Bam.
Oh, that's a good question.
That's a great question.
Yeah. So at some point, does this technology replace inclinometers that you're learning? Inclinometers are actually required by policy. And so like in workers' comp policy, you have to use dual inclinometry. So technology like this is for us to advance care towards the patient, but it's not widely accepted in government regulations for measuring range of motion, and it's also not accepted by a lot of payers. So when you look at your population of patients, if your population includes workers' compensation, personal injury type patients, or if you do a lot of in-network relationships with insurance, you'll probably still need to use dual inclinometry on top of this. But in my experience, the range of motion is very tough. So it's not that someone has exactly what any device says. It's ballparking it. But if you look at what inclinometers measure and what technology like this measures, they're very similar and very accurate.
And also to add in, they did a study with the University of Calgary on this, and it's the closest thing to the Vicon system, which is like a $100,000 system with 9 cameras and balls all over the body. This is the closest thing to that, and it takes it, I think we all know about inclinometers and are we on T1 or not. So that's kind of what it goes down to. So this, and then when they did the study, the cervical ranges of motion were extremely accurate. So it's still new.
I would say definitely in the future you're going to see changes that more technology becomes widely accepted. And I think you're also going to see like workers' comp get away from just basic range of motion. Because even though this measures range of motion and we can do it, the global measurements and return to performance there is really the meat of the system. So someone who the balance control is much more valuable than the range of motion anyway, right? Yes. Dr. Arredondo.
Regarding the vestibular assessment
Yep.
we're doing, in Texas, that's out of our scope of practice. How can we walk that back?
Yeah, that's a good one too. Okay, usually I don't take Dr. Arredondo's questions, but he's saying, so vestibular care can be borderline issues with licensure in Texas, and there's certainly types of testing within Texas that are not appropriate. So anytime you're putting fluid in the ear by a chiropractor, that's no longer allowed, and those types of things. So with this testing, what you're doing is it's under you're not diagnosing a vestibular deficiency. What you're doing is you're trying to rule it out, to rule in. So you can have balance problems from vestibular, you can have it from eye problems, and you can have it from motor control, those types of things. So what we're trying to do is rule out the possibility of something else to rule in motor control. Because when it comes to motor control, that's our piece of the pie, right? Vestibular and eyes would go to other healthcare practitioners. So if you did these tests where you're simply just moving the head, and with some of them you have to watch the timing, so some of the research shows that doing some things in this pace is better, that if you see findings there, that means referral.
We also in the clinic have used it mostly for stability and mostly for the athletes, stuff like that. Put them on the one leg that they jump off of and kind of see where they move during that 20 seconds. We haven't done the super stuff.
Okay, anything else before we pack it in? Okay, thank you. Have a good one.
Thanks, guys.